And I went to Oklahoma City, and I found where Daddy was working. He was working on an oil well up there, an oil drilling rig. And I told him I wanted to go in the military. And he said to me, son, he said, there's nothing here. And he said, if you want to go in, he says, you get the papers and I'll sign for you. And he signed for me. And I took the papers over the next day, and I ended up signing up in the Army. I was accepted. And I ended up there, and little did I know that was the last time that I'd see any member of my family for almost 5 years. And after I signed up, took the oath, they put me on a train, shipped me to San Francisco. After I got to San Francisco, I ended up there for some time. Then I was put on board ship, sent to Hawaii, which took quite a while. And I'd never been on board a ship before. And on the way over, there was a lot of seasickness. I didn't get sick, but there was a lot of other guys that did. Then we fought until April the 9th, 1942. Then we were surrendered by General King. Then we ended up going to, finally I ended up to the WWII Penal Colony. And I was there for some time under very trying conditions. Then shipped back up to Luzon. Then from Luzon I was shipped to Japan. And I was on what they call the Matamata Maru, which means slow, slow ship in Japanese. And I was there. We got to Japan, and I was in a place called Yokkaichi, Japan. When I first got over there, and I worked in a steel mill. And they worked us hard. And circumstances were terrible. And the Japanese, in every case, in every place that I was in, in the Philippines, in Japan, were cruel. I saw people executed. I saw people literally starve to death. I almost died myself from malaria, yellow jaundice, dengue fever, many other things. And I just, to this day, do not know why I'm still here. Many people think that it was horrible what we did in dropping the 2 atomic bombs. But the 2 atomic bombs saved millions of lives. They killed millions of people. But by dropping the 2 atomic bombs, the Japanese surrendered. If they hadn't dropped the 2 atomic bombs, the Japanese would have continued to fight and lose every man, woman, and child under conventional warfare. And I found out later that the moment that they attacked the main lands of Japan, we as prisoners of war, every one of us were to be executed. Then after that, it was shortly after that, they started to parachute food into us. And we started to eat good. And we started to help some of the Japanese. And short time later, we saw 3 parachutes with 3 men in it. And they came in, and one was a corpsman, a doctor, and an interpreter. The interpreter we didn't need, because we understood Japanese. Most of us could speak the language by that time. And because it was almost necessary that we understood Japanese. And we were there for quite a little while. Then they I started putting weight on, started gaining weight, started feeling better. Then they flew in some planes, and I was on the first plane to fly out. They put me on a plane and flew us from there to Okinawa, and finally they flew us back to Manila. Then after we got back to Manila, they put us on a ship and sent us home. We got to San Francisco, and we had to wait for a pier. It was Pier 7. That's a pier that I left out of. And we had to wait for quite some time. Then after I got home, sometime later, 2 years later, I got to talking to my brother Bill. And I asked him when he went over, and it was the same day that our ship was coming in. And he left from Pier 7 at the same time I was supposed to go into Pier 7. So he was going to Japan and the occupational forces at the same time I was coming in. And I didn't see him for 2 more years after, but then we saw each other. And during my absence, I had a little sister that was born that was 3.5 years that I never saw. Didn't know I had. And in my lifetime, I started my life really on my own. At the time, I was about 16 years old. And when I met my wife, in San Francisco, I was in the hospital. And while I was in the hospital, she and I became engaged. And she lived here in Tallinn here. And when I was released from the hospital, I came out here to get married with the idea of going back to California, and she'd have gone with me. But I came out here, arrived out here on October the 12th, 1945. And the foliage was absolutely beautiful. And I got to the farm where she lived, in Tallinn, and I had made a point to put on a clean uniform and get dressed as clean as I could, and look my best. And I asked where Redzon lived, Andrew Redzon, and they told me where one lived, but it was her brother. So I went up there to his house, and I was looking for the father, but she was at the brother's house. So we got together there and we drove up to Father's house and got up there and then I met the mother and two of the younger brothers, and then she went down and got her father, and he came up and met him, and he took me down to the barn. He was having a problem with a cow that was having a breech birth, and he asked me to come with him. He needed some help. So I went down and gave him a hand. Here I am in my clean uniform, looking good. He's a little short guy, and he told me what to do to help him. When he got through, he put his hand on my shoulder. It was bloody, and from working on it. He says, "You good boy, I like you." And that was a loving relationship that lasted all of our life. Couldn't find a job that I could stay with because I was having problems with PTSD, serious problems. She had to put up with a lot of stuff with me when I first came back. And I used to have to get in the car and drive out and talk to myself, tell myself to straighten out. And I was in what they called special duty. They didn't discharge me right away. And I was at taken care of by a Manchester separation center. And Sheriff Hyde, who was the high sheriff of Talon County at that time, he said that he'd like to have a veteran if he could as deputy jailer at Talon Jail.